So maybe it was a reason to hope. I never expected it to happen. On August 3rd, Rakefet Ginsburg, CEO and executive director of the conservative Masorti movement in Israel, met with Rabbi Eliezer Melamed, ultra-Orthodox head of Yeshivat Har Bracha, and his wife Inbal at their home in the heart of the West Bank. It was not a meeting to change minds. Neither party expected to convince the other they were right or wrong. It was just a conversation, a 3-hour conversation to acknowledge the humanity, the yearnings, the sincerely held beliefs of the other. It was an attempt to begin to bridge a divide, and perhaps an opportunity to imagine how courageous leaders, even we ourselves, might somehow redirect our political, religious, family discourse away from the crash course we seem to be on. You may have heard how on Tisha B'Av, ironically the day marking the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem for the sin of sinat chinam, baseless hatred, a group of ultra-Orthodox youth from an organization called Liba disrupted egalitarian prayer services in Ezrat Yisrael. Ezrat Yisrael is the small area far away and out of sight of the regular Kotel Plaza where egalitarian worship is permitted. On that night, a woman was chanting from Lamentations for a conservative minyan, and the group came in with portable walls, set up a mechitza, and began singing in an effort to drown out the service. To their credit, many political leaders in Israel, including President Bougie Herzog and others, condemned this group's actions, and so did Rabbi Melamed, which was a big surprise. Recall that in 2016, a deal was brokered by Natan Sharansky, then head of the Jewish Agency, between the American non-Orthodox movements, the Orthodox Western Wall Heritage Foundation, and Women of the Wall, to turn that makeshift space, Ezrat Yisrael, into a permanent structure for non-Orthodox prayer with an entrance near the main Kotel Plaza. In exchange for official recognition of that space, all agreed that the rest of the Kotel Plaza would officially become an Orthodox synagogue supervised by the rabbi of the Western Wall, where the prohibitions against women gathering, singing, or reading Torah, or wearing talit and tefillin would be enforced. At that time, we celebrated the compromise. We got and we gave in the name of Jewish unity and pluralism. But there was a backlash. The ultra-Orthodox media described the compromise as a declaration of war. And in 2017, the Haredi members of the governing coalition forced Prime Minister Netanyahu to freeze implementation of that deal. Now, the average American has a hard time understanding what all this fuss is about. You may know the story of the American journalist who heard about an old rabbi who visited the Kotel twice each day for over 50 years, and she decided to check out the story. She went to watch him one afternoon standing at the back of the plaza for 45 minutes while he prayed. When the rabbi left the plaza, the journalist introduced herself. "I'm so-and-so from CNN. I understand, dear rabbi, you've been coming to this place to pray for more than 50 years. What, may I ask, do you pray for each day?" The rabbi explained that he prays for peace between Jews and Arabs, peace among Jews, happiness, prosperity for all. And the journalist asked how it feels to have been praying so fervently for 50 years at Judaism's holiest site. "It feels," the rabbi explained, "like I've been talking to a wall." In America, we have Orthodox synagogues and conservative and Reform and Reconstructing and affiliated synagogues. Everyone prays peacefully in their own way, in their own spaces. But to paraphrase Natan Sharansky, nobody tries inserting personal requests to God inside the cracks of our synagogues. There's only one Kotel. And it isn't just a pile of stones. The Kotel is the top destination for every Jew who visits Israel. I remember fielding the questions on our own trips. When are we going to the Kotel already? It's a monument to Jewish history, a symbol of national Jewish identity. And the disagreement has an air of zero-sum game. Which version of Judaism are we going to promote? Mine or yours? I don't understand yours. We can't have both. That's the mindset behind the stinging criticisms, the stinging things some have said when they call conservative and reform counterfeit, or idolaters, or clowns who stab the Torah. In their minds, they are simply protecting truth with a capital T, something we talk a lot about during the days of awe. On this day, we say in Unatana Tokef, your sovereignty is celebrated, your throne is established. With kindness, you sit upon it in truth. Emet. It is true that you are the judge and the prosecutor and the expert and witness who writes and seals and enumerates and counts and remembers. Emet. But what is truth? How do we know truth? Who gets to decide what is falsehood and what is truth? This day is all about affirming truth, and if there's only one truth, it's not just ultra-Orthodox Jews who claim to possess absolute truth. It doesn't matter which political party you support. Approximately 50% of the voters in this country believe you voted the wrong way. And neither they nor we can understand why. Do they not understand what I know? Do they not care about what is good and right and just? Are they just bad people? Think about all the seemingly innocent words and phrases that have become politically charged and dangerously divisive. End racism. Proclaim liberty. Be inclusive. Black lives matter. Blue lives matter. Follow the science. Choose life. Protect my body. Support Israel. The peace process. Palestinian rights. 2 states for 2 peoples. Each of these phrases espouses truth, and each, when interpreted in certain ways by certain groups, becomes acrimonious and contentious. Or personal relationships that have gone sour. Is it always the other person who must take the first step? Do they always have to admit they were wrong and I was right? Or is there another way? That's what made the meeting between Rabbi Melamed and Rakefet Ginsburg so extraordinary. It came about after Ms. Ginsburg called Rabbi Melamed to thank him for comments he had made in support of the Ezrat Yisrael arrangement. Since there are many Jews who identify with the conservative and reform movements, he wrote in part, and they arrange for themselves common prayers for men and women in a style and with rules that are not according to the halakha, it would be right, he said, that in the Ezrat Yisrael section they should be able to hold their prayers with due respect. Now notice, Rabbi Melamed did not concede his interpretation of Jewish law. He didn't concede his truth or legitimize our approaches to worship. He simply acknowledged that the Jewish world is a family bigger than any one faction. God is bigger than any one understanding of truth. And we have to understand what a difficult concept that is. For an ultra-Orthodox rabbi who fervently believes that his way is the right way, it took incredible courage, and we must take note. Reminds me of a scene from Fiddler on the Roof. Tevye the milkman is chatting away with the men of the town when Perchik, the radical and worldly student from Kiev, happens upon them. "Why are you talking about such provincial matters?" Perchik asks, condescendingly. "You should know what's going on in the outside world." Mordechai, the innkeeper, responds, "Why should I break my head about the outside world? Let the outside world break its own head." Tevye looks at Perchik and says, "He's right. The good book says, if you spit in the air, it lands in your face." But Perchik does not concede. "Nonsense," he says. "You can't close your eyes to what's happening in the outside world." And Tevye looks back at his friends, says, he's right. At which point, Avram, the bookseller, has had enough. He's right, and he's right. They can't both be right. Tevye looks at him for a second and responds, you're also right. You're also right. My question this morning is there room for a pluralistic approach to truth in other areas? Is there a way to affirm my beliefs without delegitimizing the other? Is there a way to learn, to encounter, to engage with those with whom I disagree without betraying my own values? Is every person who holds a different view than me really dangerous or heretical or disastrous? Is there hope for our relationships beyond the zero-sum polarity of I am right or you are right, but one of us is categorically wrong? Our rabbinical tradition says the answer is yes. A midrash expounds on the letters that make the words emet, truth, and sheker, falsehood. The three letters of emet. You got to look at them in your head for a second. Aleph, Mem, and Taf. Each one rests on two legs. While the three letters of sheker, of falsehood, Shin, Kuf, and Resh, each only has one leg. Says the Midrash, truthful actions stand firm, while actions based on falsehood do not. Furthermore, says the Midrash, the letters of emet are far apart. Aleph is the first letter of the alphabet, Mem the middle letter, and Taf the last one. While the letters of sheker, falsehood, are bunched together. These are three of the last four letters of the alphabet. Truth is hard to attain, while falsehood is readily at hand. Falsehood emerges from groupthink. It's easy, but you have to look beyond your safe zone to acquire truth, emet. Falsehood is partisan. Truth needs more. One who seeks the truth must have the humility to hear from the other side as well. What happened to change Rabbi Melamed's views on reform and conservative worship at the Kotel? How could someone who disapproves of our approach to Jewish law come to laud our efforts to fight assimilation, strengthen Jewish identity, and fight and advance Tikkun Olam? Why was he willing to speak with the non-Orthodox when his colleagues are not? The story, as reported in Yisrael Hayom, goes back to November 2020, when he met with my colleague, Rabbi Sharon Brous, in Los Angeles. Newsweek once called Rabbi Brous one of the leading, most influential rabbis in America, but she has written and spoken critically about Israeli policies towards Palestinians. And Rabbi Melamed visited her because he was angry. He looked at Rabbi Brous in the eyes, wagged his finger, and said, "You are hurting me. I'm a settler. I live near Nablus. I'm a man of halacha and a very moral man, and you are calling me evil." And Rabbi Brous froze. She looked at the rabbi for a long time and then began a conversation. They discussed things about which they did not agree. And then Rabbi Brous said, "Rabbi Melamed, the next time I'm in Israel, I want to spend a day or two visiting you and your wife Inbal at Har Bracha. I want to truly get to know you, listen to what you have to say. I don't know if I'll change my mind, but at least we'll get to know each other." To paraphrase Yitzchak Rabin alav hashalom, you can't create truth with just your friends. You have to take risks. You have to accept the possibility that you might learn something even from an adversary. The ancient rabbis spoke of Shiv'im Panim LeTorah, 70 faces, 70 different interpretations of Torah. They said the Torah was given in 70 different languages. You have to understand, for them, 70 is like 1,000,000. There are 70 nations in the world. 70 languages, 70 faces amounts to a concession that there are an infinite number of paths, an infinite number of ways to uncover God's absolute truth. The Talmud records how for 3 years the schools of Hillel and Shammai debated, with each side proclaiming, "Halacha kemotenu," the law is like me, until a heavenly voice proclaimed, "Elu va'elu divrei Elohim chayim, v'halacha kebeit Hillel." Both these and those are speaking words of the living God, but the halacha, the law, follows Hillel. So then the Talmud asks, if both sides are speaking truth, why does the law follow Hillel? The reason is because the school of Hillel was humble enough to teach their views together with the views of Shammai. Moreover, the Talmud continues, they taught the views of Shammai first, before teaching their own. Truth requires an understanding of all sides of the argument. But still, there's only one law. There aren't an infinite number of ways to observe Shabbat or recite the Shema. And if there's only one law, I just thought of something actually. Law spelled backwards is wall. If there's only one law and there's no pope-like authority who can interpret it with an infallible certainty, what are individual practitioners to do? The first century sage, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, suggests we just have to try harder. Aseh oznecha ka'afar keset, make your ear a hopper, to hear the teachings of those who say unclean together with those who say clean, those who prohibit together with those who permit, because it is all Torah. It is all God's word. As the Torah states, Vayedaber Elohim et kol hadivarim ha'eleh. God spoke all these words. The principle is not restricted to Jewish law. Political debates, interpreting scientific data, creating public policy, we have to temper our claim to truth with humility. Sometimes I have to contemplate the possibility that even when I win, even when I'm sure I'm right, I might not be completely so, or at least the other guy might not be completely wrong. As Brad Hirschfeld puts it in his book, Finding Faith Without Fanaticism, you don't have to be wrong for me to be right. Think about that. At one point during the negotiations over the Kotel, someone asked Natan Sharansky who was the real enemy. He could have blamed politicians, religious leaders, rabble-rousers, but Sharansky laid the blame elsewhere. The enemy is arrogance, he said. That sense from so many battle stations that we know we're better than you, that we chose a better path than you, and therefore we don't need you anymore. Arrogance leads to delegitimization, and we all do it. Who among us has never feigned an inability to understand how somebody could possibly support that position? But that's not truth. Arrogance in pursuit of emet, of truth, only produces sheker, falsehood. You may know the passage from Pirkei Avot, Kol machloket shehi l'shem shamayim, any controversy for the sake of heaven will have lasting value, while controversy not for the sake of heaven will not endure. There are lots of interpretations about what constitutes an argument for the sake of heaven. But the best one comes from Professor Raphael Yaspi, who suggests that an argument for the sake of heaven is an argument that cannot be resolved. An argument not for the sake of heaven, for example, when a person sues another for a debt, has to be resolved by the court, Yaspi writes. But when the argument is for the sake of heaven, there's no winner, no loser. The truth is never closed. It always must continue to be sought through the open exchange of diverse views. That, to me, is the challenge of navigating in our polarized world. In family squabbles, as in political debates, we want there to be a final status agreement. We want there to be a definitive fight. We want our truth to win. We yearn for the day when Isaiah's promise will be fulfilled, when all people will come and say, "Come, let us go to the Mount of Adonai, where we will all walk in God's paths." We dream Zechariah's dream, that someday Adonai will reign over all the earth by Yom Hahu, and on that day, Yihiyeh Adonai Echad Ushemo Echad, God's name, God's truth, essence, will be one. But we're not there yet. And until then, the question is, can we find another way? Can we reach out to those with whom we disagree? Can we muster the strength to see and hear and love the other? Can we trade our crash course of division and mistrust for a new path of understanding and love? Can we come to accept that our truth, my truth, is dependent on the validity, the humanity, the legitimacy of the other? For as we say in our liturgy on this holy day, when God sits down on the throne of truth and opens the book of truth, V'chotam yad kol adam bo, God will find the seal of every human hand. Shana Tova.